Hello and welcome to our final PowerPoint module for the semester. This week we're going to talk about some solutions, meaning we spent a lot of time in this class identifying the problems, identifying the health inequities that exist and the social determinants of health outcomes. I want to spend at least a little bit of time this semester talking about what we can do in order to better address the social determinants of health and mitigate health inequities that exist. That is the focus for this week, and we have touched upon solutions throughout the semester, but I do want to spend our final week of material really digging into those solutions. So here are our objectives for this week. First, we're going to spend the majority of our time discussing ways to reduce health inequalities in the US and globally. Then we're also going to consider the role of medicine in addressing the social determinants of health. All right, and this is a specific example of an area of work and an institution where we could do a lot of work to better address the social determinants of health. I expect this module will take about an hour. There's one video, bit of lecture, but probably take you about an hour. Here are your deliverables for this week. As usual, you have your reading question due Monday night and your PowerPoint module due Tuesday night, and you have 3 questions to respond to in this module. And then you do have your final course paper due Friday. Okay? Remember that last week I said if you are happy with the projected grade that I put on your course paper rough draft, it should be on the first page of your rough draft. If you're happy with the grade that's on there, then you do not need to submit a final paper to me. You have already submitted the rough draft, and what I would do is just replace your final paper grade with the projected grade that I put on your rough draft. Okay, so that is an option. I can also be a little bit flexible with the deadline for the course paper. I can't be quite as flexible as I have been in the past because you do have your presentations coming up during the final week of class, and you need to have your paper done in order to do your presentation on your topic. So if you do need a couple more days, you can let me know, but please do aim to get these in by Friday. Speaking of your final presentations, here's a very brief set of instructions for your paper presentations. The full prompt for your presentations is on Inquire, so please do go to Inquire to find that prompt. You're going to give a 3-minute presentation, so brief, 3-minute presentation on your course paper topic. And your course paper was written for a professional audience, right? You were writing using evidence, technical evidence, and you were writing for a professional audience. Now your presentation is actually going to be for a general or a public audience, right? So it shouldn't be written or it shouldn't be prepared for a public health expert or a room of public health experts. Here I want you to be able to present to a general audience, those who don't have that public health background. The full presentation slides or instructions are on Inquire. We will also talk about this in class. We do have our regular class time on the final week. We have the 12th and the 14th when we're meeting, and these are going to be our presentation dates. So if you typically meet in class, and you will be meeting in class, you'll present on the 12th. If you typically meet on Zoom, you will present on the 14th. Here's your opening question, and I hope responding to this question will actually help you to start thinking about your final paper presentations. If you were to explain the social determinants of health perspective to someone with no public health experience or expertise, how would you do it? What would you say? What examples might you use? Okay, so I want you to pretend that you're talking to a general audience with no background in public health here. You can pause the PowerPoint module at this point, answer this opening question on Inquire, and then come back for the rest. Before we talk about what we do with all of this information that you've accumulated over the semester, I want to start by reflecting on where we've been. And this is simply a list of the topics, the weekly topics that we covered this semester, okay? We actually started with health inequity and ethics as a more broader conceptual lens. But in the topics we've covered, we started with income and wealth, we got to power and politics, place, and so on. And then we ended last week by talking about social networks and relationships. And all of these concepts, all of these elements of our social identity, our social location, these are all connected to our health in direct and indirect and overlapping ways, right? So I also want you to notice here that we didn't have a section titled healthcare or health insurance, and this was not an oversight, all right? That said, I do want to talk a bit about healthcare this week, not about healthcare as a determinant of health, which it is a determinant of health, but how healthcare workers can better incorporate the social determinants of health perspective into the way that they do medicine and into the way that they talk about health. So we will talk about incorporating the social determinants of health in medicine, but we're not going to focus on healthcare and healthcare access. Of course, healthcare access is important, but that's all we focus on as a society, and that's a bit of a generalization, but we spend a lot of time talking about healthcare and medicine and not a lot of time talking about the social conditions that really do shape our health in fundamental ways. And of course, this is the theme of the course, and this is the theme of that last chapter from the Glia book that you read for this week. Okay, so where we've been, now let's talk about where we go from here. To start this conversation on what we can do in order to really address the social determinants of health and reduce health inequities, I want to start by thinking about this more conceptually, right? Before we get into some specifics. And the model that you have on the right side of the screen here, this is a social ecological model of health advocacy. So where different areas to intervene and who the major players are at each level of potential intervention. So at the highest level, we can think about public policy. And this is where state legislatures play a role. Top departmental officials, whether we're talking about the federal level or the state level or the municipal level. So public policy is an ultimate goal of reforming policy in order to promote health equity. This is a goal of public health, and this is one way to address the social determinants of health. For example, we might think about taxation and policy related to economics and how this has downstream impacts on socioeconomic inequalities and health inequalities. Public policy is important. It's not the only goal, though. It's just one goal. Policy is also shaped within community and organizational contexts, and there are things that we can do on a more micro scale that really can address the social determinants of health and really can work toward promoting health equity, okay? So I don't want you to leave this class thinking that if you're not writing policy, that you can't do anything to really promote health equity and reduce health inequalities, right? That's not the case. Advocacy occurs at multiple levels, and simultaneous action at all levels is the most effective, okay? So we're talking about community level. You can get involved in local communities. You can get involved in health issues that are taking place in Salem, in Roanoke, or in your hometown. Institutional or organizational contexts. Think about Roanoke College as an institution. What could change at the college level in order to really promote student health or the health of everybody who is a part of the college? These are things that you can do something about. These are things that you can be vocal about. And then also at the interpersonal level and the individual level, right? What you can do as a member of your community, whether that's the college community or a neighborhood community or in the workplace, in order to really advocate for health equity. This is really where you can think of the most direct connections, the most direct things you can do in order to promote health equity. But the main point I want to get across here is just because you aren't writing policy or just because you aren't working as an epidemiologist, I mean, that doesn't mean that you can't really use a public and population health perspective in order to advocate for health justice. Okay, so that's very conceptual. This week we'll talk about some more specific examples and specific things that you can do. Now, some of you, not all of you, might be thinking about going into clinical care, whether that's through becoming a doctor or health provider, a nurse, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, whatever. Some of you might be thinking about going into clinical care. And I want you to come away from this course really prepared and thinking about how you can bring a social determinants of health perspective to that kind of a career. So we haven't talked all that much about what's happening in healthcare settings, but this is one place where the social determinants of health can be addressed, just one place. So in order to have a conversation about this, first you did a reading on this called Fundamental Interventions, How Clinicians Can Address the Fundamental Causes of Disease. That's one of your readings for this week. And I assigned this in part so we could go full circle and come back to this fundamental cause theory that you had read about at the very beginning of the semester when we talked about income and wealth. So recall Lincoln Phelan's social conditions as fundamental causes of disease. This is the reading that you did early on in the semester. What does it mean if something is a fundamental cause of disease? And I will say here, we're really talking about the social determinants of health, just using a different type of language. So a fundamental cause, and this is pasted from an earlier PowerPoint module. A fundamental cause is something that affects access to health promoting resources. And that resources is a pretty broad term. It could include money, knowledge, power, prestige, social support, social networks we talked about last week. These are resources that can promote health. On the flip side, a lack of money, lack of power, lack of social connections, or having really not positive social connections, this can be adversely related to health, right? Can be related to poorer health. So, fundamental cause affects access to health promoting resources. In addition, and this was early in the semester we talked about this, a fundamental cause influences multiple risk factors and multiple health or disease outcomes. All right, and this does highlight the complexity when we think about the social determinants of health, because there are multiple social determinants and they affect multiple things, right? That's what makes this topic difficult and interesting at the same time. And then the third part here, and this really is the takeaway from fundamental cause theory, is that the link between a fundamental cause and a health or disease outcome is persistent. So even as risk factors are changing that are connecting a fundamental cause to a health outcome, that original connection between the fundamental cause and the health outcome is still there. So for example, across human history, we have seen that economic status is a determinant of health, right? We've seen this centuries ago, we see this today. And the mechanisms connecting status or economic status to health have changed, right? As technology has changed, as types of resources available have changed, as society has changed. The mechanisms connecting SES or economic status to health have changed. But that fundamental link is still there between economic status and many health outcomes, okay? So that was a review, and we need to understand this and remember this before we can really think about how medical practitioners can include this in their thinking about health and disease among patients, and also in their actual practice of medical care. That was the topic of this reading. There were some more general connections drawn in the reading. There are also some very specific ones. We'll talk more about those in class, but I want to use this as a preface for the video that you're about to watch in the next slide that talks about medical practitioners and what they really can do to address the social determinants of health. All right, so I'm going to stop talking there. I think I've ranted on the slide, and we'll go to our video question. All right, so here's your TED Talk or your video question that includes a TED Talk about incorporating the social determinants of health in medicine and what medical providers can do. So watch the TED Talk from Mary Bassett. It's titled, Why Your Doctor Should Care About Social Justice. Link is on Inquire. I want you to watch that and then answer this question. What role do you think medical providers, so that includes doctors, nurses, therapists, and so on, what role do you think they should play in addressing the fundamental causes of disease? I don't think that actual terminology is used in the video, but this is all about the fundamental causes of disease, okay? You can use the video and also draw on the readings that you did for this week in order to answer this question, right? So you can pause, watch the video, answer the question, and come back for the last few slides. So I want to wrap up by talking about what our responsibility is, or what our responsibilities are as individuals to really work to address the social determinants of health and promote health equity. You do have one more closing question after this, so don't go anywhere as soon as the slide's over. But here's a list, and this is not a complete list, of things that we can all do as individuals. You don't need to be a state senator or governor or working in the White House in order to really be able to act to promote health equity. So here's what we can all do. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from this class, it's what you can do. First, challenge individualistic assumptions about the causes of health and disease. This is at the core of understanding the social determinants of health. Yes, of course, our choices matter for our health. We do make decisions, but we need to consider how those decisions are bounded by the structural conditions that surround us, whether those be economic or social or political. We need to be able to think bigger about the causes of disease. In addition, we can all advocate for policy reforms that tackle fundamental causes of disease. We can advocate in a number of ways. We can advocate simply through speaking with others, through supporting, this actually taps into bullet point a couple points down from here, but by supporting and voting for candidates who are running for office who really do prioritize social justice and health equity. That's a form of advocacy. We can post on social media, but also really just talk with people around us about why these issues are important and provide some guidance on the nuance and the complexity of how social conditions are connected to health. Because honestly, outside of an academic setting and outside of having these kinds of conversations, I don't think there are enough opportunities for people to have discussions about these complex causes of disease. And that does contribute to the culture we have that's very individualistic, that's very focused on medicines and treatments and health behaviors and not really thinking about context. Also apply the social determinants of health perspective at work, whether that work is in clinical care, which some of you I know are thinking of, or maybe it's in health education or in epidemiology and research. Maybe you do want to go into health policy or anything else, even if it has nothing to do with health directly. One other thing you can take away from this class is everything's related to health in some way. So you can bring this perspective to work with you, right? And really consider the implications of decisions you make, decisions, whatever organization you work within, decisions that the organization makes. What are the connections to health for those policies or those practices? And then the last thing I have on here is pay attention, right? Because the world changes and our national, political, social, economic climate changes rapidly, and sometimes it changes without us really recognizing what's happening and why it's happening. And if there's anything this year has taught us, it's that social and economic change can be very swift. And we need to keep on top of what's happening. I know it's exhausting, but we need to keep on top of what's going on. We need to keep on top of the policies that are going through Congress. We need to pay attention to what's happening locally and the health issues that emerge as a result of a crisis like the pandemic we're experiencing right now. Okay, so pay attention. And that's something that goes for, understanding and following up with public health, but also just with social issues that affect us all. Okay? So I'm going to get off my soapbox now, but I do want you to know that you have some power in really being the voice of change and really being the voice of reason, because we need those right now, right? We need reason and we need evidence. And this class should have given you both of those things and hopefully some passion for this topic too. All right, so I'm going to stop there. Here's your closing question. This is the last question in a PowerPoint module you will ever have to do for this class. If you have me in a future semester, you'll probably have more modules, but hopefully you're used to it at this point. Here's your question. Imagine that you are trying to convince a skeptical friend that universal access to healthcare, while important, is not enough to eradicate inequities in the health outcome you chose for your course paper. That sentence is a mouthful, but hopefully you follow that. What would you say to that friend? And this is to give you a bit of a head start in thinking about your presentation for your final paper. Your final paper presentation, because this is what I'm asking you to do. I want you to convince somebody that really just access to healthcare is not enough to eradicate the inequalities that we see for whatever population you selected for your course paper, okay? So pause, answer that closing question, and then come back for the final slide, which is just about what we're doing this week. As usual, we're going to have our in-class group meeting on Wednesday, our Zoom group meeting on Friday, and the purpose of this week, because the next week is going to be presentations, the purpose is really to wrap up the course, and we're going to talk about what we can do to promote health equity. Please do come prepared to discuss. I know that this module was a lot of me ranting about how important all this stuff is, but that's because it is, okay? And I'm sorry that it took a little bit longer than I anticipated. All right, but I look forward to seeing you in class or on Zoom this week. All right, I'll see you soon.